Thank you for coming. This is the 819th meeting of the Economic Club of New York, now in our 118th year. And we are excited to have Representative Jeffries in the House, the Minority Leader, as our guest today. So let me start off by introducing him. You probably know his background already, but he was elected as the leader by his colleagues in November 2022. He's now in his 7th term. The congressman obtained his bachelor's at the State University of New York in Binghamton, where he graduated with honors for outstanding academic achievement. He then received his master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University. He graduated from New York University Law School, magna cum laude, and served on law review. After graduating from law school, Jeffries came in as a law clerk in the U.S. Southern District of New York. After that, he was in private practice at Paul Weiss. He then went on to get elected in the New York State Assembly, representing Brooklyn. So with that, Leader Jeffries, if you could come up, we'll get started. Great. Also, before we get started, I wanted to mention that the Majority Leader of the State Senate is with us, Andrew Stewart-Cousins. Thank you. As we debate all these things that the mayor may or may not do, the next mayor, nothing will happen unless it goes through her, so just so you know. So I guess we have to start with the elephant in the room. Thank you for being here, but the shutdown. And the fight seems to be over health care. There's a view that the last time this happened, you were for extending it and for continuing resolution. Now we're not. And that they're just trying to go back to what they had back in, I guess, 2019 before COVID. So can you kind of give some context why it's different this time?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Charles. It's great to be here. Bob, Barbara, and all of you. In terms of the position that we've taken relative to the moment that we're in the context of funding the government, for several weeks, beginning in early September, we made clear that we want to find a bipartisan path forward to enacting a spending agreement that meets the needs of the American people along 3 criteria in terms of their health, public safety, and their economic well-being, particularly as it relates to the high cost of living in the United States of America. And we meant it as it relates to entering into a bipartisan agreement. At the same period of time, we said we will not support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of the American people. In a moment where we're in the midst of, in our view, an extraordinary health care crisis that Republicans have visited on the American people. If you just think about what happened this year, largest cut to Medicaid in American history. This was after the president said that Republicans were going to love and cherish Medicaid, and then turned around and enacted $1 trillion cut to Medicaid, 14 million Americans on the precipice of losing their Medicaid coverage all across the country, including in rural America. Hospitals, nursing homes, community-based health centers are closing now because of what happened in terms of Republican policies in that one big ugly bill. Closing now, and that's going to continue. A possible cut of $536 billion to Medicare, which will occur at the end of this year unless Congress acts because of what happened in the Republican reconciliation one big ugly bill. And on top of all of that, the refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits is going to result in tens of millions of Americans experiencing dramatically increased premiums, co-pays, and deductibles. Those notices are going out right now, and open enrollment starts on November 1st. And then in the context of the appropriations bill that emerged from the House as it relates to the Appropriations Committee in the area of health, basically are asking Democrats to sign off on an additional $1.7 billion cut to the Centers for Disease Control, and about $450 million in cuts to the National Institute of Health, They want to continue to gut vaccine availability in real time, causing public health crisis moments across the country, including currently in South Carolina, where children can't even go to school. So this is a Republican healthcare crisis that is real and is devastating. And our position was pretty clear. We're not going to support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues the healthcare crisis that they're visiting on the American people in real time. And so our position at the moment, remains, we want to reopen the government. We support our hardworking federal civil servants. By the way, more than 200,000 federal employees were run off the job prior to the government shutting down. So this is who they've been in terms of the Trump administration prior to the government shutting down.
But does
More
the
than
president
200,000
have
federal employees.
But does the president have negotiating leverage? Because he found a way to pay the military, he found a way to fund the nutritional programs for WIC, and so the key areas that he might get heat on seem to be taken care of. Can he just wait till out now?
No, listen, I mean, and it's not, from our view, Charles, it's not about waiting us out. It's about delivering for everyday Americans. Like this healthcare crisis impacts working class Americans, middle class Americans, everyday Americans, all across the country, including, of course, in congressional districts, disproportionately represented by my Republican colleagues. And so this is not, a manufactured issue from the standpoint of the healthcare crisis, as no short of an expert, as Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has revealed. So we just feel like this has to be addressed decisively, and it needs to be addressed now.
Their rationale seems to be there's plenty of fraud and waste and abuse and undocumented immigrants who are taking advantage of the system. Is there anything to all that?
Well, we're always of the view that there's opportunity to make sure that any program that is administered using taxpayer dollars should be as effective and as efficient as possible. But for many of my Republican colleagues, like the go-to refrain is waste, fraud, and abuse. Then you actually ask them to point out where's the waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's crickets in terms of anything meaningful compared to what's being presented. And this argument that was articulated by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that Democrats are fighting for health care for undocumented immigrants, is so divorced from reality, given the fact that current law provides that not a dime of taxpayer dollars can be used for comprehensive medical care available through Medicare, Medicaid, or the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And of course, it's belied by the fact that notices are going out to everyday Americans as we speak, making it clear that their premiums are about to double, triple, or quadruple in value or in cost. In at least the Phoenix district, a couple making less than $100,000, I think currently may pay with Affordable Care Act tax credits about $2,000, $2,500 a year in its coverage out of pocket. That could increase to over $20,000. And we've got examples like that happening all across America. And so we want to reopen the government. We want to enact a bipartisan spending agreement, but it actually has to make life better for the American people, not continue policies that are hurting everyday Americans. And we want to address this healthcare crisis in the context of the cost of living crisis that exists.
Well, it's an economic club, so I have to ask you a few economic questions. Let's start with the Federal Reserve independence. I mean, conventional wisdom is that you need a strong, independent Federal Reserve as part of several other things, to rule of law and things like that, to be the reserve currency, which we've been for a long time. But the dollar is down about 10% this year, and people are starting to suspect that maybe we don't have the things we used to have. How do you and your colleagues think about Federal Reserve independence? Should he be able to change members as he's trying to do right now, or do we need to do something else to protect that?
Well, the law, of course, requires that the president can only remove a board member for cause. And clearly in this instance, there's no cause that exists relative to his effort to try to remove Lisa Cook. It's a made up allegation. that really has emerged from a political hack in the administration who's trying to just target people for partisan reasons that have nothing to do with the best economic interests of the American people. And our economic system is the envy of the world, and the fiscal policy and the monetary policy and the separation and the role of the Federal Reserve in that regard. And this really has been an unprecedented, at least in modern American history, assault, I would argue, on the market-based economy. Bullying CEOs, bullying corporations, firing the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, going after the Federal Reserve board, taking shares in American companies. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. And when you look at the totality of it, and then of course, on top of it, as most independent observers acknowledge, the White House is running the largest pay-to-play scheme in the history of America to come out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, at least the history of America since the 20th and 21st century. How is that consistent with a free market economy? It is not. So I think all of it has to be looked at in totality. And that's just the macroeconomic dynamic. And then of course the big challenge that everyday Americans confront is the affordability one. That life in America is too expensive for far too many people who are struggling to live paycheck to paycheck. They cannot thrive and they can barely survive. And housing costs, of course, are too high. Electricity costs through the roof. Childcare costs too high. Grocery prices haven't gone down despite the promise by the president that costs would go down on day one. They haven't gone down, they're going up. I think we would argue that the tariffs, of course, are making life more expensive, adding thousands of dollars in additional expense. And now on top of that cost of living crisis, Republicans are refusing to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which is going to skyrocket costs for tens of millions of families. And by the way, the 10 states that are most impacted if the Affordable Care Act tax credits are allowed to lapse are states that Donald Trump won. Like, this is not a partisan issue for us. This is a people-centered issue. 5 states impacted the most, I believe, are West Virginia, Wyoming, Alaska, Tennessee, and Mississippi. And so, we think that it's just the right thing to do to address the issues related to the economy as the American people feel it, and that's cost of living, while of course protecting the institutions that have made the American economic system, like the Federal Reserve, the envy of the world, and allow for the dollar to continue to be the reserve currency of the world.
Let's switch to the national debt for a second, because it's now nearly $1 trillion in interest costs, almost 100% of GDP. It's twice what it was 8 years ago. It just seems unsustainable. Wall Street is worried about it. It's unclear where we can cut, had so many mandatory programs. Is there any discussion in Congress, like, we got to get control of this, we can't keep spending this way, we have to balance this differently?
Yeah, listen, we tried to make that argument in the context of the legislation that Republicans passed earlier this year, which of course we affectionately refer to as the one big ugly bill, which the notion that you would enact the largest cut to Medicaid in American history, indisputably, $1 trillion cut to Medicaid, affect 14 million Americans. And then add to that the largest cut to nutritional assistance in American history, which is in fact the case, literally ripping food from the mouths of hungry children, seniors, families, women, and veterans. And that's happening in real time. Those cuts take effect now. And all of this was done largely so that, in our view, Republicans could reward their billionaire donors with massive permanent tax breaks. They don't even want to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits for a year or two. Permanent tax breaks for, in our view, their billionaire donors, and then you add $4 trillion to the debt to accomplish something that actually hurts everyday Americans. So, we think it was fiscally irresponsible to do so, but not inconsistent with the same type of economic policies that we've actually seen repeatedly from prior Republican presidential administrations, where deficits actually are brought down under Democratic presidents. That was the case, certainly Bill Clinton not only reduced the deficit, he eliminated it and handed over a surplus to President George W. Bush, who almost instantaneously changed that surplus into a significant deficit and grew the debt because of tax legislation in 2001, tax legislation in 2003, and of course what we know to be now failed wars in Afghanistan and particularly in Iraq. And 25% or so of the nation's debt heading into this presidency actually were accumulated under the 4 years of President Trump. And a significant amount of that had nothing to do with COVID. Nothing to do with COVID. A lot of that was because of the 2017 legislation that they passed, the GOP tax scam, in our view. And this was when President Obama actually had inherited a deficit of about 1.5 trillion and a failed economy, and over an 8-year period reduced that deficit by $1 trillion and handed Donald Trump a deficit of 500 billion. Manageable had we sustained the trajectory, but of course a different approach was taken. And now we see the same thing repeating itself. So yes, Charles, you're absolutely right. This has to be addressed. I would argue that, of all the things that President Biden was able to accomplish legislatively in his first 2 years, these things were largely paid for, and the deficit in those first 2 years with all the legislative activity that took place before divided government, deficit came down $1.7 trillion. So we're all in to try to do this in the right way. Unfortunately, because of the policies and the decisions that were made in complete control of government by Republicans this year, the situation has gotten far more complicated than it needed to be.
But is this a bipartisan discussion? People just want to know, do they recognize kind of the severity of the problem right now on both sides, I guess?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say we recognize the severity of the problem. And it's going to require, at least in my view, at minimum, divided government in order to seriously, lean in and figure out, okay, we've got the expenditure side, we've got the revenue side, and then we've got, economic growth. And what is the right combination of expenditures, of revenue, of growth, in order to get the situation in a more sustainable place? 100% basically of GDP is not sustainable, and I think other than Social Security payments, our largest expenditure right now is debt service.
Yeah.
And so that's challenging, and it's fair to say that on our side of the aisle, we're prepared to address it in good faith, but it's not going to happen until there's divided government in the aftermath of the 2026 midterm elections.
Let's talk about the change in executive power, the expansion of executive power, I should say. This is the first time since the Nixon administration where a president is exercising discretion to withhold appropriated funds. Something's appropriated, but they don't have to spend it. At least that's the argument from the head of OMB. Appropriation means that's the capacity, I don't have to spend it. Is that your interpretation? Do you want to preserve that for future presidents, or should we do something about it?
No, I think that the framers of the Constitution were very clear that we want a country anchored in this principle of separate and co-equal branches of government. And that Congress, of course, should both serve as a check and balance on a potentially out of control executive branch in whoever's hands that executive branch may be in at the time. And of course, during the founding of the Republic, there were no political parties. In fact, George Washington, in his farewell address, said, "We hope there will never be political parties." Clearly, we didn't listen to that part of George Washington's farewell address. But But everyone was clear. In fact, Madison said, Congress at its best should be a rival to the executive branch. Madison's words, rival to the executive branch, Congress at its best. And, powers were allocated to Congress, including the power of the purse. And it was specifically given to the House, whereas, the power of confirmation was given to the Senate. And so we unfortunately, we think that some of my Republican colleagues, for whatever the reason, have chosen to ignore the clearly allocated powers given to the House and, collectively the House and the Senate on the appropriation of taxpayer dollars. And whether it's a Democratic president or Republican president, I think that's a principle that we should be prepared to continue to support. It's the right thing. We're also seeing this kind of overreach, Charles, to your question, in areas like aggressive military action, most prominently right now off the coast of Venezuela, and what many, are concerned are extrajudicial killings. We haven't had a single briefing from the administration. Normally this is done in a bipartisan way as part of Congress's authorities in this space. We know that there's executive overreach in terms of tariffs, which is also tariffs and trade, both the province of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution. Like these aren't minor details that are being, overrun. These are constitutionally allocated principles that are being overrun. That of course, we're working hard to vindicate in court, but it's hard to, we're not understating the crisis in terms of executive overreach that we experience right now. And we're in a cycle of the pendulum swinging back and forth. We've gone from George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton, to George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump to Joe Biden back to Donald Trump. And the likelihood is the pendulum will swing again in 2028. And so in that context, one would think that members of Congress would want to defend their policy prerogatives that are anchored in the United States Constitution. But unfortunately, that's not what we've seen to date. Hopefully that will change.
A lot of projects that have been frozen, the Gateway Project, the Second Avenue subway here. You've seen what's happening in R&D funds for universities. Is there any remedy to restore some of that, or you just have to wait till later?
Well, I think, part of the eventual negotiation that takes place, in the context of the reopening of government and then getting to a comprehensive spending agreement that funds the government through the entirety of the fiscal year, we're going to have a meaningful discussion about congressionally allocated funds should be spent in a manner consistent with the law, period, full stop. And that's whether those projects and priorities come from or relate to Democratic initiatives, or Republican initiatives. These are American initiatives, in our view. And Democrats and Republicans will benefit from the Second Avenue subway, benefit from, the New York, New Jersey tunnel project. Everyone benefits. And so it's extraordinary that, for whatever the reason, the administration seems to think that they're just punishing Democrats. No, you're punishing the American people. And the American people see it increasingly as punitive. And it's not, in our view, inuring to the benefit of the president, certainly in the context of his public approval ratings, which are at an all-time low, in that regard, or at least an all-time low other than the days immediately after January 6th. And it's not, and the public clearly understands, in our view, who to hold accountable for the fact that the government has been shut down and remains shut down now for 20 days.
Let's switch to affordability, which is certainly driving the race here and for mayor's race locally, but I think nationally it's the issue, maybe even in the last election. Economic growth is slowing a little bit, it won't be great. The top 10% of earners are doing almost 50% of the spending, so people feel left out. And now you have AI coming, it's unclear how much it's impacting that, but it could impact it even more going forward. Has Congress kind of thought about that if we have this permanent issue of more automation, and what happens and what are the remedies?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a broader challenge that we do have to confront in America, which is that far too many people across the country, whether, working class America, urban America, rural America, small town America, the heartland of America, black and brown communities throughout America, far too many people have correctly concluded that the American dream is not accessible for them and for their families. And that's not just conceptual, right? I think I would define the American dream as when you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to then provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family, or go beyond that. But the floor, a comfortable living for yourself or for your family, or as I would describe it, work hard, play by the rules, live the good life. And I would define the good life in 5 simple ways: good paying job, good housing, good health care, good education for your children, and a good retirement. Anchored in things like Social Security and Medicare. Work hard, play by the rules, live the good life. The problem is, literally for at least half the country, if not beyond, people have correctly concluded that I can do the first 2 things: work hard and play by the rules, but I'm unable to get to that landing place connected to the American dream, live a comfortable life for myself or for my family, live the good life as I define it. So that's a big problem. And of course, automation and the rise of AI, while, creating benefits in a variety of different ways, also create challenges, particularly in terms of what the job market looks like moving forward for working class and middle class Americans, and in the context of AI, white collar Americans. And so we do need a meaningful, common sense, center, left of center, right of center, policy engagement about how to actually revive what has long been viewed as the foundations of the good life in the United States of America for everybody. And that's something certainly as Democrats we hope to engage in and have made clear we want to engage in on the affordability issue, but it goes beyond the affordability issue. Certainly that is the biggest challenge facing everyday Americans right now.
All right, a few political questions. One area that the administration has delivered on is the border. So crossings are way down. It used to be a peak of 2 million under Biden, and now it's 200,000, something like that. Do you think that's a good outcome? Would you continue the policies that resulted in that? And did the Democrats kind of get that wrong in the last election?
Well, I definitely think we have to, every policy should be evaluated, in real time in terms of the benefits that are being delivered to the American people. It certainly is the case that we need a strong border, a secure border, and a safe border. And I think that in the last administration, of course, the administration made the decision that they were going to try to negotiate a resolution on the border security issue, and had actually reached the strongest border security legislation that would have existed in the history, of the country. And then it was detonated by then candidate, former President Trump, because he said, "No, I'd rather the issue, I don't want the policy issue addressed." And so I think it's reasonable to say, perhaps, in hindsight, obviously being 2020, that the administration should have just taken decisive executive action earlier and not proceeded in good faith as if Republicans were going to operate in good faith, particularly in an election cycle, because they didn't. And, that is, what it is. We certainly can never allow the situation at the border to ever become as challenging as it was, particularly at the height, of the border crises. And a lot of that has to do with the asylum system that is broken and needs to be fixed. And we need to fix that, in a comprehensive way. We need to fix our broken immigration system in a bipartisan and a comprehensive way. But at the same period of time, as Democrats, we have made clear, we're going to stand up for dreamers, stand up for farm workers, right, stand up for law-abiding immigrant families who are being overrun by extremist policies and actions in American streets and towns and counties and cities being unleashed by this administration in ways that the American people are rejecting, that have nothing to do with border security, and in some instances have resulted in American citizens being targeted, including children who are citizens being deported, some with serious medical conditions that are now putting their lives in jeopardy.
You are 3 seats away from becoming Speaker of the House. So let's talk about what are the odds that will happen. What are the lessons learned from the last election? You talked about affordability, you need to focus on that. But you're underwater with men the party is and a few other issues. What have you changed going into the midterms in terms of strategy, and is the party behind you in terms of the messaging?
Well, I think certainly, our view has been, and let me also thank, Leader Schumer and Senate Democrats, because they've shown tremendous strength and courage in this current moment, standing up for the health care of the American people. And that's consistent with our view as House Democrats in terms of the things that we want to address on behalf of the American people. Lower the high cost of living, fix our broken healthcare system, and clean up corruption. To actually deliver a country of the people, by the people, and for the people that actually makes life better for everyday Americans. And right at the top of the list, of course, is affordability. And that is something that we want to decisively address, and indicated from the beginning of this Congress that it would be important for us to do just that. Now, the 2024 elections did not, go our way, and affordability, the border, of course, being 2 issues that were significant challenges. One of the reasons why public approval has turned against President Trump is because he's failed to keep his core promise, and the core promise was, we're going to lower the high cost of living and lower costs on day one, right? His words, not our words, on day one. But of course, costs haven't gone down, they've gone up in so many different areas of importance to the American people. And that will have, consequences politically, I think, in the midterm elections. As you pointed out, we're only 3 seats short. Now, what's very interesting about that dynamic is that's the narrowest majority that any party has had in the House since the Great Depression in 1931. And if you actually compare that, heading into this midterm election, if you actually compare that to when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, he lost the popular vote across the country, lost the popular vote, but came into Congress with 241 Republicans in the House and only 194 Democrats. And of course, we had to pick up 24 seats, and in that election, we won 40. This time around, he wins the popular vote, and I believe does better in every single state, all 50 states.
He did not win the popular vote. He's never won the popular vote.
He just won the popular vote in 2024.
49.9.
Yeah. He won the popular vote vis-a-vis Kamala Harris. So, yeah. He won the popular vote vis-a-vis Kamala Harris. So, I didn't say he won a majority, I said he won the popular vote, right? That's a plurality. So, but he won it. And so, I think he wins the popular vote, and yet comes into Congress and there are only 220 Republicans and 215 Democrats. So I think that's a testament to Democratic incumbent members of Congress and challengers in places like New York and California, where we flipped a total of 7 seats, even though Donald Trump did better in New York and California than he had ever done, and better than any Republican presidential candidate since Reagan. And yet, Democrats across the country in Congress, and this was in fact also the case in blue and purple states in the Senate, were able to overperform a tough environment at the presidential ticket, laying a foundation, we believe, for finishing the job in the midterm election, because the American people don't want to see Congress as just a rubber stamp for extreme policies coming out of the administration. They actually, I believe, want to see a check and balance and an effort, to try to work together to achieve policy outcomes that make life better for them.
But Texas is going to make it tougher for you. They're adding, I think, 5 seats for redistricting. How do you respond to that, I guess?
Well, the response initially came in California, and I was just in California over the last 2 days campaigning in support of Prop 50, the Election Rigging Response Act. Thankful for the leadership from the California congressional delegation, from the state legislators, certainly from Governor Gavin Newsom, who made clear that we can't simply operate with one hand tied behind our back and unilaterally disarm in an environment where we're experiencing an unprecedented effort to rig congressional maps all across the country, including in Texas, where Republicans are trying to rip away 5 seats that are currently held by Democrats as part of this effort to, in our view, rig the midterm elections, as opposed to allowing the American people to actually make a decision about whether we want to continue the trajectory that exists in the House of Representatives right now. Is this really working out for everyday Americans in terms of the issues that they care about, affordability, health care, their quality of life? Or is it not working out? That's the decision that should be solely in the hands of the American people. So California responded decisively with Prop 50. And I'm confident that Prop 50 will be successful, and that will ensure that there's an even playing field across the congressional map nationally relative to Texas and California. And then, as has been clear, Donald Trump has spent more time talking to Republican legislators in places like Indiana and Kansas and North Carolina during the 20 days of this government shutdown than he has talking to Democrats trying to reopen the government.
Yeah.
He's also spent more time on the golf course than he has talking to Democratic legislators in the Congress. But that's extraordinary to us. That's what we're confronting. And so, we've made the point. We will continue to respond, right, in a manner consistent with our values. Texas just ripped these seats away behind closed doors in the dead of night, largely without debate. In California, what's being done is being done consistent with the Voting Rights Act, and the voters get to make the decision, which is exactly the right way for it to be handled in the context of what's occurring in California. And I just want to make this point. The midterm election, this is, the constitutional construct where, you have the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Article 3 judicial branch. This was done in a way that was very intentional, in that if you look at that spectrum, the House has 2 years, the presidency 4, the Senate 6. I mean, imagine that, must be nice, 6 years, right? And then the Supreme Court, life tenure. 2, 4, 6, life. That's the spectrum. And those were intentional decisions that were made in terms of the courts so that they would be immune from the politics of the moment. And that was an important decision, not subject to reappointment or subject to election. That's on one side of the spectrum. And in this context, these extreme policies being unleashed, we're hopeful that courts will continue to hold as best they can in pushing back against the overreach. And Supreme Court has been very shaky in this area, but the lower courts have been stronger. And then on the other side of that spectrum, the House, the People's House, right? I think the decision was made. You know what? President gets sworn in, and if that president goes too far, as this president is doing, just gone too far, the American people only have to wait till the very next year, to say, no, you've gone too far. You've broken promises. You're actually hurting everyday Americans, and we need a check and balance. And that's their decision. That's the decision that the American people should be allowed to make. This is not a parliamentary democracy. They could have said this is a parliamentary democracy, in which case I think the country would be jammed up, because basically it'd be 4, 5, or 6 years before the voters would have an ability to say, you've gone too far. But the democracy that was gifted to us said, no, the very next year after you are sworn in, the American people have an opportunity to weigh in. And Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to alter that, and we're not going to let it happen.
Well, I know you have to get back to DC and open up the government. We promised to let you out at 11:45, but thank you so much for coming. This meant a lot, and everybody wanted to hear all this.
Yeah. Thank you all.